Francis Doran lived by rhythm, the kind that never faltered, never missed a step. His mornings began at the same hour, the same meal measured into the same bowl, eaten in silence with the storm muttering against the glass wall. The spire swayed with the weather, but Francis never did. His apartment on level 43 was stripped of excess, a soldier's den disguised as civilian quarters, a table without clutter, shelves aligned with perfect symmetry, one folded, blanket on the couch. It wasn't the life he once had, out in fractured sectors, where knives were sometimes the only law, but it was the one he had chosen, predictable, controlled, clean. At evening followed no different pattern. He was seated at the table with his cup, the pale light of the city bleeding across the window. The hum of cargo trams far below was steady as breath. Then, at 21 to 106, the door chime sounded. Too early for delivery, too late for colleagues. He had no neighbors, not in the sense that counted. Francis set his cup down and crossed the room in measured strides. Old training slowed him at the threshold. He checked the peephole, weighed his options with the same discipline he once used when choosing whether to step into a firefight. What stood beyond was not a package, not a courier. A woman. When the door slid open, the first detail that struck him was her state. Ceremonial wraps, thin as gauze, clung to her body, soaked through by the storm. Not clothing chosen for comfort, not for dignity, chosen for her. Her skin carried the violet undertones of a Zyenne Allen hybrid, laced faintly with green where the corridor light caught her. White hair plastered wet against her shoulders. Eyes like lit teal glass, sharp and unyielding. She looked directly at him, and that mattered. Most looked down in her position. Her voice was flat, as if rehearsed, drained of ownership. Delivery for Francis Doran. His jaw tightened. That's me. Who sent you? She glanced at the panel beside the door, then back to his face. Her. Hands clutched a satchel tied with cord, her only possession. Registry says you're the recipient. A pause, brittle. But I wasn't meant for you. I was meant for Magistrate Kellen. The words hung heavy, simple as ledger entries. Francis read the tension in her shoulders, the whiteness of her knuckles around the cord, the endurance in her expression. Not fear, endurance. That was worse. It meant she had walked this path before, that being handed over had become a language. She understood too well. Inside his head, thoughts cut in precise lines. She had been ordered, routed, and delivered. A mistake in assignment. If he reported it, the error would be corrected swiftly, and she would be redressed, displayed under Kellen's roof like rare coinage. If he did nothing, he became the mistake. Her name, he asked. She hesitated, then gave it. Serial. He watched the way she said it, shoulders rigid, eyes daring him to close the door. He had seen that look before in prisoners, in refugees, in anyone who had been reduced to a transaction, and knew it. His scar itched with the memory of command decisions that had done the same to others. Francis exhaled slowly. His voice stayed even, as steady as the storm outside. You're wet. Come inside. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing. You're not returning me? No. The single word settled in the corridor like a stone dropped in water. 4. The first time, her practiced mask cracked. Not relief, something more unsettled. A fracture between what she expected and what she had received. He stepped aside, leaving space. She entered, slow, cautious. The door hissed shut, sealing out the storm. The silence inside was heavier than the weather outside. She stood dripping on the spotless floor, scanning the room as if it were a trap. No weapons in sight. No others. Waiting. Just order. Just him. Francis watched her calculation, knew it because he had lived it. She was measuring risk, the same way he had once measured every corner of hostile terrain. "The bathroom's left," he said. "Shower works. Towels are clean." She stared at him, voice edged. "You don't even know me. You should have called the bureau. You're freezing." The words silenced her more than any command could. She moved past him, each step careful. The door closed behind her, and water soon filled the apartment with its muffled rush. Francis returned to the table, his mind aligning again in soldier's precision. A mistake like this was never random. Either someone rooted her here to test him, or someone decided she was disposable. Returning her meant complicity. Keeping her meant defiance. His hand rested on the cup, but he no longer tasted the quiet he had cultivated. The storm outside pressed on the spire, but it was nothing compared to the one that had just crossed his threshold. He knew the choice he'd made. It wasn't about desire. It was about principle. He would not return a person like cargo. The storm sharpened with nightfall, rain slamming the spire until the glass walls trembled with each gust. Francis sat where he always did, at the table, posture straight, gaze fixed on the door, as if discipline alone could bar the world outside. The bathroom. Door opened, spilling steam into the room. Cyril stepped out, hair slicked back, skin warmed from water. She had not touched the spare clothes folded neatly on the counter. Instead, she had retied the ceremonial wrap, pulling it tighter but leaving it no less revealing. A deliberate choice. She wanted to see how he reacted. Francis didn't flinch. Didn't look away, but he didn't linger either. His only motion was to slide a bowl across the table. Eat. She stayed standing, arms crossed. "You should return me." "No." His voice carried the same tone he'd used to close doors. "On officers once." Steady, final. "Sit." Her teal eyes searched for the angle, the trap, the moment kindness shifted into claim. When she found none, she moved slowly, like someone stepping onto unfamiliar ground. She sat. The first spoonful of food loosened the tension in her shoulders. The second softened the hard set of her mouth. Hunger had been gnawing at her. Francis watched with the calm patience of a man who had eaten ration paste for weeks without complaint. Between bites, her voice cut across the quiet. "Why keep me?" "Because I don't return people like cargo." Her jaw tightened. "That choice isn't yours." "It is tonight." The silence that followed pressed heavier than the storm outside. She studied him over the bowl, suspicious, unsettled, measuring whether he meant it. He had seen that look before men and women in war zones, waiting to discover if mercy was. Only another weapon. When she finished, she sat back, the lines in her face less drawn. "Where do I sleep?" "Where you want. Couch is warm. Bed is clean. Door locks. Choice is yours." Her lips parted, faintly incredulous. She scanned his face for the lie, found none. "The couch." He fetched a blanket, set it down without ceremony. She curled on her side, eyes never leaving him. Francis locked the door, slid the bolt, then sat in the chair angled so he could see both her and the entrance. Old scout habits? He made no apology for them. "You really won't send me back?" she asked softly, lids already heavy with fatigue. "No." "Then you've made yourself a target." "I've made myself a man who won't open the door to Kellen." Her lips pressed together, something between disbelief and a smile, but she turned her face into the pillow before either could show. Hours dragged. Francis didn't sleep. His body was trained to endure long watches, but tonight, discipline alone wasn't the reason. The storm rattled the beams. The city swayed in movements no one admitted feeling. Cyril stirred in her sleep, breath catching, hands clutching the blanket like someone was pulling it away. She whispered in her own language, a sound braided. With resistance and pain, Francis didn't move closer, but his voice carried low across the room. "You're safe here." Her breath steadied. She slept on. Morning arrived, his pale light bleeding through the glass. Francis hadn't moved from his chair. Cyril sat up slowly, hair tangled, the wrap loose at one shoulder. She noticed him still watching. You didn't sleep. No. You were watching me? Yes. It made her pause. She was used to being watched, but never like this at a distance, without reach. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, studying him with new eyes. Why live like this? She asked finally. Alone, empty rooms, order everywhere. Because order doesn't betray you, Francis said. People do. The answer silenced her more effectively than any command. For the first time, her gaze softened, not yielding, not trusting, but recognizing. He placed the folded shirt and pants on the couch beside her. Wear these. You don't need that wrap here. Her voice came sharp, defensive. This is all I was given. They stripped me of everything else. Then let it end here? For a long moment she searched his expression for mockery. She found none. She rose, gathered the clothes, and stepped into the bathroom. When she returned, the oversized shirt hung low across her thighs. It wasn't meant for her, yet it covered her in a way that made her look less like a symbol and more like a person. Francis's. Only words were steady, simple. Better. And for the first time, she didn't argue. She only crossed her arms, as if trying to remember how to stand on her own. The storm still battered the spire. But inside, something quieter had shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest crack in the walls she had carried with her. The rain eased, but never stopped. It washed the spire in endless sheets, thin enough now that the tram lines below gleamed like silver threads cutting through the mist. Francis moved through his morning routine as if nothing had changed measured. Coffee, folded uniform, boots aligned precisely by the door. Yet everything had. Cyril sat at the table, his shirt draped across her shoulders, sleeves too long for her arms. She watched him with eyes too sharp to be mistaken for idle curiosity. He set a bowl in front of her without comment. She didn't thank him, didn't question him this time, only ate with careful precision. The silence was not as brittle as before, but it carried weight. When Francis left for the logistics archive, the corridors buzzed with their usual rhythm of clerks and couriers. But he noticed the change immediately, how conversations tapered when he passed, how eyes lingered a half-second too long. He had been trained to read people. That silence was not routine. By midday, he caught a fragment in the hall. Two clerks, hunched over their ration packs, whispering too low for comfort. Kellen's gift never arrived. Someone routed it wrong. The words stopped when Francis turned the corner, but he had heard enough. At his station, his hands moved across the manifests with mechanical precision, but his jaw tightened until the scar on his cheek pulled white. Rumors spread quickly in the spire, and rumors about Kellen never stayed whispers for long. When he returned that evening, Cyril stood at the window wall, her reflection painted against the stormlit glass. She didn't turn when he entered. They know, she said. Voice flat. Francis set his coat on the hook, unhurried. What happened? Her fingers dug into her arms, knuckles pale against violet skin. I went to the market this morning. I could feel it in the way they looked at me. They know I don't belong here. You went out. His voice sharpened, more than he intended. Her chin lifted, defiance quick and fierce. I'm not a prisoner. He didn't argue. His silence was sharper than words. He set a small ration bag on the table and spoke evenly. Then you know the questions are spreading. Her teal eyes flashed. How long do you think you can keep me here before they come knocking? You can't hide me in plain sight. I'm not hiding you, he said. Then what? The crack in her voice was not volume, but weight. You think your locked door and steady voice will matter when Kellen decides I belong in his hall. Francis stepped closer, each motion deliberate, controlled. I think my decision matters, and yours. Her breath caught, quickened. My decision? Do you really believe that matters to him? It matters here. His tone cut through the rising storm. He tapped a finger against the floor between them. In this room, to me, and to you. Her shoulders trembled. She wanted to dismiss it, to accuse him of naivete. But his certainty pressed heavier than any threat. It wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. And that unsettled her more than Kellen's shadow ever had. She sat on the couch, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. After a long silence, her voice came quieter, stripped of edge. Do you know why I was chosen? You said debt. There's more. Her eyes lifted, faintly glowing in the dim light. I was supposed to be proof. A reminder that families like mine can be broken apart and offered up without consequence. They don't care if I live or die. They only care that I'm displayed under his roof. That's what Kellen wanted, to show my people they have no power left. Francis absorbed the words without visible reaction. Inside, anger pressed sharp against the discipline he wrapped himself in. He had seen it before bodies turned into symbols, survival reduced to spectacle. They chose the wrong door, he said finally. Her lips parted, startled by the bluntness. What if that mistake costs you everything? Then it costs me. Not you. Her throat tightened. No one had ever framed it like that. Not her family, not her people, not the magistrate who waited to claim her. For the first time, someone placed the weight on himself instead of her. She lowered her head, fingers twisting the hem of the shirt. Her voice fell to a whisper. You don't even know what I'm worth. I know you're not a thing to be displayed. Her eyes stung against her will. She turned back to the window, hiding the expression she couldn't hold down. Francis stayed where he was, steady as the spire's foundations. Outside, the storm battered the steel, but inside the apartment something irreversible had shifted. The whispers had reached them, the circle was tightening, and choice had been spoken aloud for the first time. The third night came heavy, the storm dragging lower across the ocean, rain turning the spire's beams into echo chambers of steel and water. Francis felt the shift long before the chime sounded. The corridor outside had grown too quiet. The air itself seemed to press against the apartment door. When the sound finally came, one clean tone, sharp and final, it cut through the silence. Like a blade drawn from its sheath. Ser, Isle froze by the window, her body tense, reflection fractured in the glass. Francis rose, not in panic, not in hesitation, but in the same deliberate rhythm that had carried him through ambushes in darker places. He crossed the floor, each step measured, his breath steady even as his scar itched with memory. He pressed. The panel. The door slid open. Magistrate Kellen stood in the corridor, flanked by two aides. He wore authority, like armor, dark coat cut from fine fabric, hair precise, a smile polished until it looked carved. He didn't bring guards. He didn't need them. Men like Kellen believed their power was guard enough. Francis Doran, he said smoothly, I believe you've received something that belongs to me. Francis didn't step aside. His voice was level, the kind that made no room for debate. You've come to the wrong door. Kellen's smile sharpened. No, the exact door. You've kept her here 3 nights. That's bold for a man who values a quiet life. Behind Francis, Cyril moved into view. Kellen's eyes shifted, and the change in his expression was subtle, a poisonous ownership expectation. The collector spotting his missing prize. There you are, he said softly, like a master to a trained animal. Come along. The hall is ready. You'll be displayed properly. Cyril's stomach twisted. Instinct screamed at her to obey. Years of conditioning pressed down until her feet shifted half a step forward. The moment stretched thin habit against will. Francis's voice cut through it, steady as stone. No one's forcing her through this door. Kellen's gaze snapped back, irritation cracking the smooth mask. You misunderstand. She was offered. That makes her mine. Transactions don't renegotiate. Francis didn't blink. I don't care what you think she is. The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Rain hammered the spire. Thunder rolled over the ocean. But in that corridor, only 3 heartbeats mattered. Serial trembled. Her body caught in the vice of command and freedom. Then, slowly, she turned not toward Kellen, but toward Francis. She stepped forward, close enough to feel the breath of him at her side. Her chin lifted, shoulders squared. I don't belong to you, she said, her voice cutting across the corridor sharper than she thought she could. I was given without choice, but I choose now. I stay. Kellen's smile fractured. The mask slipped just enough to reveal the contempt underneath. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as though speaking to a child refusing her lessons. Do you think anyone in this city will recognize your choice? Do you think his defiance matters when the council demands otherwise? Serial's teal eyes locked on his. It matters to me. And that's enough. For the first time, Kellen faltered. His trophies had never spoken. His trophies had never stood. What he saw now stripped the illusion from him. And behind her, Francis stood like a wall, silent, immovable. Readied out the aids shifted uneasily, uncomfortable in the crack of authority. Kellen smoothed his coat, regaining his composure with practiced grace. Very well, he said coldly. Enjoy your rebellion while it lasts. The city forgets quickly, but I do not. He turned, his steps precise, each one an insult disguised as retreat. The aides followed. The corridor swallowed them. Francis closed the door. The bolt slid into place with a heavy click. Inside, the air felt denser, the space smaller, but something irreversible had shifted. Serial exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs weakened. She sank to the couch, hands trembling. If I had stepped out, you didn't, Francis said. Her eyes lifted to his. Why risk it? You could have handed me over and gone back to your quiet life. He leaned against the table, arms folded, presence steady as stone. Because once you opened your mouth, it was never about me. It was about you saying it, and I wanted to see you say it. Her eyes burned, but she blinked the sting away. The man who had been delivered a mistake had given her the moment to claim herself. And for the first time, she believed she wasn't simply safe. She was free. The storm still battered the spire, but inside the apartment, a different storm had broken, and in its aftermath, nothing would return to order. The door's echo still trembled in the frame long after Kellen's footsteps faded. The hum of the spire returned as if nothing had happened, trams gliding, conduits thrumming, the city resuming its ordered rhythm. Inside Francis's apartment, order was gone. The silence was thick, dense, a weight pressing against both of them. Serial sat on the couch, her hands trembling against her knees. She hated the weakness, hated that even after standing her ground, her body still shook. She had spoken her choice. In front of Kellen, and yet her chest felt raw, hollowed. Francis didn't move toward her. He stood by the table, arms folded across his chest, posture steady, presence filling the room without pressing on her. He knew too much contact too soon would feel like a demand. He had learned restraint in harsher places than this. You did it, he said finally, voice low but certain. She swallowed, throat tight. I almost didn't. But you did. The words landed with weight. They steadied the storm still thrashing inside her more than any embrace could have. She raised her eyes, searching him for doubt. His gray gaze held none. If I had gone with him, she whispered, you would have let me. Yes. His reply came without hesitation. Her brow furrowed. Why? Because it had to be yours, not mine. The simplicity of it cut deeper than Kellen's threats. She had been raised to believe choice was illusion, that survival meant obedience, that her worth was measured by the hands that claimed her. Yet here, in this sterile room above an endless storm, a man told her word mattered. No one has ever given me that, she admitted, voice breaking against the truth. Francis didn't soften his tone. He didn't reach for her. He simply said, "Then you start now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things neither dared name, of breaths caught in their chests, of the raw fact that both had stepped into a defiance that could not be undone. Cyril stood slowly, her legs still weak, the hem of his shirt brushing her thighs as she crossed the small space between them. Her hand brushed his arm first, light, testing. He didn't step away, didn't seize it. He let her decide. Her fingers slid higher, resting against the steady beat of his chest. This time she didn't pull back. "I chose you," she said. The words broke as they left her, but they carried more truth than anything she had ever spoken. His discipline softened, just enough for him to lift his hand, to rest it lightly against her back. Not a command, not a claim, a promise. "Then I'll keep you." Not as possession, as promise. Her chest tightened, and she let her forehead fall against him. His arm closed around her shoulders, firm but not crushing, steady as the spire's foundations. Her body trembled once, twice, then steadied. That night she didn't ask for the couch. She didn't wait for his permission. She walked into the bedroom, climbed onto the bed, and waited. When he followed, she didn't flinch. Their closeness unfolded not as hunger, but as reclamation, every gesture deliberate, every touch chosen. For Francis, it was trust, letting another into a space he had guarded for years. For Cyril, it was reclaiming her body, her will, her dignity from the hands that had tried to trade it away. When dawn came, light broke pale through the storm. Clouds painted the glass wall with the first fragile rays of calm. Cyril woke curled against him, his steady breath against her hair, her hand still resting over his heartbeat. She lifted her head, almost afraid the night had been a dream. "You're still here?" she whispered. "Where else would I be?" And for the first time, she smiled. Not as armor, not as defiance. As herself, the spire outside resumed its endless order, the city ready to forget, ready to move on. But inside this room, something irreversible had begun. The storm broke with dawn. The spire's outer lights flickered. Back to life, corridors humming, climate systems sighing into rhythm, as though the blackout and confrontation had been nothing more than a pause in the city's pulse. But inside Francis's apartment, the rhythm had changed forever. Cyril stirred first. She lay with her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her hand still resting on the steady beat of his chest. For a long moment she didn't move, afraid the night might dissolve into memory if she shifted. Then Francis's eyes opened, sharp and awake, soldier's instincts never dulled. He studied her for a heartbeat before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. No words, no ceremony. She followed him into the main room, the silence between them different, now thicker, heavier, but no longer hostile. She carried herself more upright, the oversized shirt clutched at her thighs like it belonged to her by choice. Not by accident. By mid-morning, Francis felt the change in the archive. His colleagues' glances were no longer subtle. Their silence was too deliberate. Conversation stilled when he entered, words clipped and replaced by the shuffle of paper. At lunch he heard it spoken plainly. Kellen's gift never arrived. He's asking questions. Francis returned home early, his boots carrying the weight of inevitability. Cyril was waiting by the glass wall again, her reflection pale against the city lights. She didn't turn when he entered. "They're talking," he said, bolting the door behind him. "I know." Her voice was steady, but her fingers dug into her arms. "I felt it at the market. Their eyes. They know I don't belong here." Francis crossed the room, setting his ration bag on the table. "How long were you out?" "I told you. I'm not a prisoner." He said nothing more. Silence stretched, until it pulled her toward the couch, where she sat with her hands twisted in the hem of his shirt. "You can't keep me hidden. He'll come. And when he does, it won't be whispers anymore. It'll be the council itself." Francis's eyes fixed on hers, unwavering. "Then when he comes, you'll answer him." "Not me," her breath caught. "You'd let me?" "It has to be your choice. If you want him, you go. If not, you stay. I won't trade you either way." Her body tensed, caught between disbelief and something more fragile hope. She lowered her head, blinking against a sting she refused to let fall. That evening, the storm outside subsided, but tension pressed heavier indoors. Francis sat at the table, his ledger open but untouched. Cyril stood by the lantern still set from the blackout, its dim glow unnecessary, but burning anyway, a symbol of the night she had claimed her freedom. Finally, she spoke, voice low. "Do you know why it was me? You said your family had debts. There's more." She lifted her eyes, teal irises faint in the dark. "Kellen didn't want just anyone. He wanted me because of who I come from. My ancestors once defied the council. They led a strike against tribute. They were crushed, erased, but the name survived. I was supposed to be proof that families like mine can be broken, bought, displayed." Francis's scar pulled tight against his cheek. He had seen it before, in other campaigns. Lives turned into warnings, bloodlines reduced to symbols of submission. "They gave you away," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "Yes." He didn't look shocked. He didn't pity her. He looked steady, immovable. "Then they chose the wrong door." Her breath hitched. "What if that mistake costs you everything? Then it costs me, not you." She closed her eyes, fighting the ache in her chest. No one had ever placed the weight on themselves before. Not her family, not her people, and never the magistrate who waited to claim her. The following morning, the consequence arrived, quiet but sharp. Francis's archive access flickered red, his tier downgraded to probation. His supervisor approached in clipped tones, voice low enough not to draw notice. "Kellen doesn't forget, nor forgive. You should reconsider your hospitality." Francis met the man's eyes once, steady, then walked away. That night, he returned to the apartment, tension shadowing his frame. Cyril waited, as always, by the glass wall. She turned to him, reading his face. "It's begun, hasn't it?" "Yes." Her hand curled into a fist. "Then you should send me away." "Save yourself." "No." "Why?" The word tore out of her throat, raw, desperate. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space. "Because the moment you stood at that door and said you chose, you weren't a gift anymore. You are free. And once free, you don't return." Her chest heaved, tears stinging her eyes. She tried to turn away, but his voice held her. "You're not property." Not his, not anyone's. The words broke her. She let the tears fall, let herself sink onto the couch, trembling. Francis didn't move to catch her, didn't push. He only stood, solid, steady, until she looked up at him again, her face streaked, her eyes fierce. "I chose you," she whispered, "and I'll keep you," he said. Not as possession, as promise. The city outside continued its endless hum, the spire gleaming with the illusion of order. But inside that apartment, two people had broken it. What had begun as a mistaken delivery had become a declaration that would not be forgotten. Kellen had been denied. The council would not let it rest. Francis knew it. Cyril knew it. And yet when she stepped into his arms, it was not fear that burned between them, but belonging. The final truth hung unspoken in the air. She had not been delivered by accident. She had been bait, a test meant to prove no one could defy the magistrate's will. But in choosing Francis's door, and in Francis choosing her, the trap had snapped the wrong way. And the spire would never forget.